Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
We are currently assessing the scope of the measures announced overnight and will be responding in firm and proportionate way by countermeasures. We will act to safeguard our economic interests. We will protect our workers, businesses and consumers.
So that's how the European Union plans to respond to Donald Trump's latest tariffs. That's from the Trade Commissioner Maroš Šefčovič there. Will the UK take the same approach? Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Stephen Carroll.
And I'm Yuan. Welcome to the programme. Now, Stephen, I want to start the show with a rather surprising fact. It's just 3 weeks since Donald Trump became US president.
Is that all?
I had to double check this. I thought it must be 3 months or so, but the pace of change and the volume of announcements has just been really quite something. But it's the president's utterings on trade and tariffs that have really got the attention of economists and investors. Trump says he plans 25% levies now on all imports of steel and aluminium. That's the latest one, kicking in from next month. And just this morning, the EU's said it will respond with firm and proportionate countermeasures. Commission President Ursula von der Leyen saying that she deeply regrets the US levies, calling them unjustified. And German Chancellor Olaf Scholz says that the EU has the strength to respond to Trump's trade measures. But Stephen, when it comes to the UK, it's looking like Keir Starmer's government is pursuing an altogether different playbook.
Look, the UK is trying to avoid tariffs altogether. A reasonably good plan, one would think. Bloomberg reporting, citing sources saying the country doesn't want to escalate a trade war by imposing retaliatory measures. Foreign Secretary David Lammy saying over the weekend the UK is an open, free market society that doesn't believe in tariffs in either direction. Now, if this gambit fails, though, UK Steel says American tariffs would be a devastating blow to the industry. The UK exports around 200,000 tonnes of steel a year to the US, which is about a third of what Germany exports. It's less than what the Netherlands or Belgium individually export either, a little bit more than France or Spain, but nonetheless quite a large amount of steel being exported from the UK. So different responses from the UK and from the EU at the time when the UK at least is trying to mend relations with the European Union. So is Britain and its closest neighbours being pulled in opposite directions by Donald Trump? Yes,
so possibly it's an interesting divergence. Well, let's get more with our Brussels Bureau Chief, Kevin Whitelaw, who covered the previous Trump administration in Washington for Bloomberg. Now, Kevin, let's just start off with what happened today. What exactly has the EU announced when it comes to tariffs?
Well, they haven't announced much other than they're very unhappy with the move by the Trump administration and that they'll have countermeasures ready, assuming that this goes ahead as announced. And so the date is March 12th as to when these are set to come in. And so obviously the question, not just in the EU, but around the world is this a negotiation or is this a fait accompli? And I think every country is now going to be reaching out to the Trump administration, trying to figure out, all right, well, what exactly are you looking for? Is there room to talk about this? How do we avoid this kind of a shock disruption?
Well, can you take us on a journey to the past, if you will, to borrow a phrase from a Disney film, to the last time around that we all experienced this? Because steel tariffs were something that Donald Trump also imposed the last time that he was president. There was a response to it. What does that tell us about what the EU might do this time around?
Yeah, well, there was a response, and the countries did, in many cases, work to try to negotiate ways around it. For Canada and Mexico in particular, that meant negotiating quotas that could come in without tariffs. There was a little bit of that from the EU side as well, but for the most part, what the EU did was slap on various kinds of retaliatory trade measures, including tariffs on some very symbolic American products like Harley-Davidson motorcycles, Levi Strauss jeans, bourbon, that kind of thing. And in fact, the Biden administration had basically just agreed to a truce with the EU so that those measures were simply suspended. That suspension comes up at the end of March, and so the EU had already been facing a decision about whether or not to extend that or to have those snap back. So that's obviously one sort of tool that they have in their immediate toolbox as they look forward to this next one. But, obviously we know that more broadly there's been a plan on the EU side that has involved making several different lists of some possible ways to retaliate against U.S. tariffs, just sort of based on whether, the extent of and breadth and depth of whatever Trump decided to move ahead with. So they'll also be looking to see, do they want to impose the kind of penalties that are aimed to begin a conversation, i.e. to begin a negotiation, so not too strong, or do they really want to try to inflict some actual market pain and seek to deter Trump from doing this in the future?
So, Kevin, some pretty tough words out of Brussels today, but it's not true that the 27 member states are entirely united, are they, in their view towards Donald Trump? Some EU leaders are quite pro, and many of them can't stand the man, and there's not entire unanimity over how to deal with this, is there?
No, that's right. And obviously trade is sort of a broad Brussels competence. And so you are, in theory, going to see the Commission taking the lead on this. But there definitely is the potential for individual countries to try to cut individual deals. And it's also very likely that Trump may try to indeed exploit that, may try to make that happen as he tries to fracture a little bit of the bloc's unity. But, at least when it comes to the sort of metals tariffs that are, as you said, going to hit probably Germany the hardest, there is, at least from that side, I think still a fair amount of interest in trying to respond in a unified way. But, they are taking a certain amount of solace in the notion that Canada, Mexico have been able to at least come to some early negotiations and stave off, at least for a time, some threatened tariffs. And so I do think that they'll be watching closely as those negotiations continue, as well as how China and the U.S. end up approaching the issue as they go forward.
So, Kevin, does that tell us then that the UK could manage to, escape these tariffs and take a different approach and play this in a different way?
I mean, it definitely does. I think everyone's going to be doing this. We've already watched the Australians begin their conversations with Trump over this, and it's very, very likely the UK will. They have that flexibility, obviously, now, post-Brexit, to be able to cut their own deal without any particular ramifications. But, they'll also be looking towards the EU side and wanting to make sure that they're preserving the relations with Brussels. So I think right now what the UK has going forward is that Trump seems to kind of like the prime minister and has had pretty warm words for Keir Starmer up to now. And so I do think that at least this time around, London may not be in his immediate target zone.
Yeah, and conversely, it would be fair to say that Donald Trump is not very keen on the European Union, calling the trade relationship an atrocity recently. But he's got a long-standing kind of history of disagreements with Brussels, hasn't he?
Yes, I mean this has gone back a ways. He's talked several times throughout the campaign, not to mention his first term, but several times in the campaign and even after becoming president, that Europe treats the U.S. unfairly. He's called it an atrocity. He's talked, as you said, about tech policy. We had Vice President J.D. Vance in Paris today at the Artificial Intelligence Summit, and there he also took on the bloc's approach to tech. So I do think that you see a number of different areas, both in the trade zone, but also in sort of the broader regulatory approach, where there is a natural problem.
Now, the UK and ministers in the government here have been very careful not to offend Donald Trump since he became president, and have been very careful in their language in reacting to the various steps that he's taken. The UK's new ambassador to the US, Peter Mandelson, has been trying to smooth things over in the special relationship, talking about having to respect and understand what drives Trump in his decision. Now, he'd previously been quite critical, so it's a bit of a turnaround for Peter Mandelson. Is that sort of language going to win over Donald Trump and perhaps play favourably?
I mean, it can't hurt. And it is interesting. There's a number of different leaders, as you say, both in the UK but also elsewhere, who have taken great pains to try to compliment him, to flatter him, to appeal to him in various ways. It feels, it seems super transparent, but it does sometimes seem to work. We've watched the NATO chief, Mark Rutte, do this several times, talking a lot about what Trump has done on defense spending and trying to credit him with a number of things that basically were happening already. So I do think that there's always that potential, but ultimately, Trump, he does like to win. He does like to be seen getting things, and I think there's always that slight risk that at some point the UK is going to do something that intentionally or otherwise is going to put itself potentially right in Donald Trump's target zone, and that's where that's where all of that work could get undone really quite quickly.
Yeah, and the UK obviously has a good chance to diverge from the EU here, perhaps getting off US tariffs if they can win Donald Trump round. But there are risks to this, aren't there? And as far as the UK is also trying to build a better relationship with the EU, and potentially this could go down quite badly in Brussels, right?
I think it depends as to who's as to whose expense any deal comes at, right? So if they're able to cut their own deal and it doesn't affect the relationship with the EU directly, there may not be resentment. In particular, there may not be an immediate backlash, but at some point, London's probably not going to be able to have it both ways. And so there has been this conversation about a UK-EU reset. I think Brussels is frankly still trying to figure out what the new UK government means by that. And it's possible that Keir Starmer himself is still trying to figure that out. But obviously, if that gets serious, if that becomes something much bigger, then that has the risk of starting to, put the UK back in sort of the EU camp as far as Donald Trump is concerned. But obviously, the UK also has to think about where its long-term future is really going to lie. Where is the trading relationship need to be? Where is that political relationship going to be? Where is that defense relationship going to be? And if you look at a Trump administration that's likely to already pulling the U.S. in a more isolationist direction, stepping away from obviously foreign aid responsibilities, but other potentially other responsibilities, as everyone worries about what's going to happen with U.S. aid to Ukraine. That's going to leave the United Kingdom with some real choices about where it needs to be when it comes to protecting itself and protecting its interests in Europe and beyond.
Yeah, really tricky one. So many known unknowns. Where's Rumsfeld when you need him? Kevin, thanks so much again joining us. Great to get your thoughts on that. It's Kevin Whitelaw, our Brussels Bureau Chief.
Well, just to mention too, the latest we've heard from the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, saying that she believes the UK can strike an agreement with the US to avoid tariffs on steel and aluminium, and also suggesting that Britain doesn't plan to retaliate. So in line with what we've been hearing from other ministers as well, and talking about the need for balanced trade, what the UK and US have means that there's not really a problem in Rachel Reeves's eyes that needs to be addressed through tariffs or any other barriers. She was speaking to the Political Party podcast, so interesting to get her perspective on all of this as we're considering how the UK will choose to respond. That's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe and give it 5 stars so other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you listen.
This episode was produced by Tiwa Adebayo and our audio engineer was Peter Nicolino. I'm Yuan Potts.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. We'll be back with more tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.